populist parties throughout Europe, they all feed themselves on the same reasons. And is a growing discontent with the political establishment on the part of citizens. An increased perception on the part of citizens that the political system is controlled by a few, by an elite, against the interests of the overwhelming majority. All populist parties in Europe feed themselves upon this. But then the concrete political agendas and the ultimate goals vary.
Hello, listeners, and welcome to The Inoculation. My name is Eva von Schaper, and I'm hosting this podcast together with Daiva Repichkaite.
Hi, listeners.
Who did we just hear? This is somebody that you invited.
Yes, so I had a chance to go to a talk by Professor Poiares Maduro, and he agreed to be a guest on our podcast. So we asked him to comment on the Portuguese and also the more general European political system and the challenges it faces from disinformation and polarization.
Okay, so what he can tell us is he can give us some insights on one of our topics in this season, which is disinformation on the political fringes. He can give us an overview, and he can also help us understand Portugal a bit better. Is that right?
Exactly, and Portugal is known for having a different political spectrum compared to many countries to the north and west of Europe, because for a very long time it didn't have any far-right presence, and the general sort of center of the political spectrum is more to the left in Portugal. You can find more information in the episode we did on Portugal last year after the Portuguese election.
Okay, but this election was actually quite special last time.
Exactly, because from one member of the far right, which was kind of the odd one out, the Portuguese parliament went on to have 12 of them, and this really surprised a lot of analysts. And there were different theories that maybe the far-right leveraged social media much better than all the other parties.
Okay, but we can talk about that. We'll hear what Professor Maduro has to say a bit later. First, let's let him introduce himself.
So I'm Miguel Poiares Maduro, and I'm the professor at the European University Institute, the School of Transnational Governance, where I am the chair of the executive board of the European Digital Media Observatory, and I'm the dean of Católica Global School of Law in Lisbon.
Okay, so I think the first thing that was interesting to know, or that we wanted to ask Professor Maduro, was if he could sum up the huge changes that digital media has brought. It's not only social media, how it differs from traditional media, but also how this might change the political landscape and how it is indeed already changing the political landscape.
Exactly. So it's not only social media, but also the speed and the quick turnaround of news in digital media. That is the interest of Professor Maduro.
Mm-hmm. And I think he also told us that he believes that there are some qualities that social media has that help fringe parties. So let's just listen what he had to say.
The algorithms work on the basis of very different criteria than the traditional journalist criteria. And the criteria that determines how algorithms use is mostly driven by the business model of the social networks. It's not driven by considerations of political pluralism, of balance, of credibility of sources. It is what attracts more attention and therefore drives people to more hits and produces more money on the part of social networks that gets more relevant.
At the heart of social media is something that we don't see in traditional media, and those are algorithms. So basically what we're talking about is that it's automated decision-making by computers.
One of the things that we know, as I said, is that algorithms are driven by what generates more interest in people on an instinctive basis. And we know that neuroscience tells us it is things that tend to shock people, tend to alert the emotional side more. Even if when people don't like them, whether people like them or dislike them, it's things that shock them that tend to drive more their attention and therefore tend to be amplified more by the algorithms and tend to be more widely disseminated, get more salience in terms of these editorial processes of algorithms. What does this mean? More radicalization, more polarization, because those are the things that the algorithms more pick up and make more visible.
So all of this sounds like fringe parties know better what they're doing. And I think you asked him whether we can attribute this deliberate will to exploit social media. Is that right?
That's exactly right. And I think he had a really interesting answer. Let's just listen in.
I cannot tell you because I have we have no empirical data for that there is explicit intentional strategies on the part of any party to explore these by purposely choosing messages that they know that are going to shock more people, and because of that will get more visibility. But of course, one sees that kind of speech being disseminated, so one could assume that they know, at least because that they see, that whenever they speak more radically and more violently, that they get more visibility. That they can see. No, they can see that tweets and posts that use that kind of language that get visibility. So naturally, they will tend to learn from that in a negative way, but in a negative way, that the more violent their language becomes, the more likely it is that they will get more salient and get more visibility.
So algorithms are this black box that we cannot see how they make one tweet or one post more visible than the other. What we do see is the result, that actually the more popular tweets or posts on social media get even more visibility and are pushed to more people. And we saw that the far-right Chega party was actually getting a lot of attention for its tweets about vaccine mandates in Portugal. Disproportionate attention compared to much larger and much more established political parties, if we only look at retweets and favorites on Twitter.
So the Chega party is the party that we were talking about before, which went from, I believe, or 1 seat in the Portuguese parliament to 12 in the Portuguese election that took place just about a year ago.
Exactly. Something important to remember is that when we talked to experts while working on this episode on Portugal last year, they told us and they elaborated a lot on the inspirations that the Portuguese far-right draws from other European countries. And we also found trends around the way different political powers talk about vaccine mandates in France, in the Netherlands, in Portugal, even though these countries had a completely different situation.
Exactly, and I think one thing that was very surprising when we went back and a year ago after Russia's invasion of the Ukraine, when we looked at France and we looked at the Netherlands, we found parties who were on the far right wing of the political spectrum were more likely to retweet pro-Russian, pro-Putin, and anti-Ukraine tweets, or to tweet themselves. So not only retweeting, but tweeting themselves.
Exactly. We can link to that episode as well in the description box.
And, we asked Professor Maduro about this, and here's what he had to say.
You've seen both on the extreme right and the extreme left throughout Europe, and different positions being taken in this respect. We know that whoever supports Russia is on the extremes, and it's fringe parties. But in some countries have been more extreme left parties, in other ones have been more extreme rights, and in some countries it has been a mix of both. In Portugal, it's more the radical left that has taken a position more favorable to Russia than the populists of the right. So the populists of the right have basically been silent on that. They haven't been strong supporters of Ukraine, and here I'm talking of the party of Chega, of Ventura. They haven't been strong supporters of Ukraine, but have also not taken positions that feed on the disinformation narratives of Russia. Instead, the party that has most strongly taken a position favorable to Russia is the Communist Party in Portugal. And the Communist Party in Portugal has a long traditional relationship, first with Soviet Union, then with Russia. They are really orthodox, and they've been spreading the idea that Ukraine basically it's a neo-Nazi regime, that it is Ukraine that provoked Russia. They've bought into these. They claim that their only interest is peace, but that peace is to be guaranteed by Europe not supporting Ukraine. That is only feeding the war. They basically are the ones that are more widely spreading this narrative. There's the left bloc that has been slightly ambiguous. It seemed to be close to the Russian position support. Then they realized that they were probably going to suffer a strong backlash because the public opinion has very strongly supported Ukraine and Portugal, and they backtracked into a closer position to Ukraine. Now it depends on the members of the party and the days too. Sometimes they are more they open up to the Russian position. Other times they backtrack on that.
Mhm.
But the party that has more strongly endorsed and reproduced the disinformation narratives on the war of Russia has been in Portugal, the Communist Party.
What Professor Maduro told us about Portugal surprised us a little bit.
Yeah, what we also found was that there's what I would call maybe energy disinformation, that we have powers trying to build a case in the media against the Ukraine. So basically saying this war is bad because the war is going to drive up gas prices.
And it's also not worth helping, because then our poor citizens will suffer from rising gas prices. Is that right?
Exactly. And, we have seen, as you know, Germany is quite dependent, or was quite dependent, on Russian gas. And we have seen, and this was actually just at the end of last year, at the end of 2022, that gas prices were extremely high, and people were quite afraid that they wouldn't be able to, pay their energy bills, pay their gas bills.
Exactly. So we wondered, did this happen in Portugal? None of us speaks Portuguese, so we asked Professor Maduro.
That kind of discourse also on the war, basically saying supporting Ukraine is bad because it's feeding the war and therefore means higher energy prices for the people and everything there. In Portugal is basically the discourse of the Communist Party. The Chega has not make use of that speech. And I think it's because part of Chega is really hardcore conservatives that were anti-communist and anti-Russia from the start. So they don't want, it will be complicated for them to have that kind of discourse.
What I was very interested in, and this goes back to one of the first discussions that we had, or one of the first interviews that we had, you remember, which was Alice Herasimenko in Oxford in the UK, that anti-vaccine tweets and basically the political structures and the messaging structures that are being built up on the back of anti-vaccine tweets may be a pathway for new parties and new radical parties to form. And this is something that I think we saw in Germany when we had, I'm just going to call it an attempted mini coup. And these are people who are very active in the anti-vaccine. So we asked Professor Maduro if this is something that would also apply to Portugal and to the far-right Chega party.
I have no doubt that Chega wants to become a government party. And I think their role is to try to implode the right and center right to the point that then they become instrumental to do what Salvini almost achieved to do, and that in fact Front National did in Italy. That is, they fragment so much the political system that then they become the bigger within the center right, and they become crucial for any political alternative of government, and therefore they will present themselves as unavoidable government. And it buys into the political protest speech, but it is not a party that wants, and Mr. Ventura is not someone that wants to limit himself to be a protest politician. He wants to be in power, he wants to gain power. To a large extent, I mean, you have to realize that he's a very smart, very intelligent person, that I think it's driven much more by political opportunity reasons than by strong ideological convictions.
So in the end, the Portuguese political spectrum is quite different, and we see that there's a lot of competition on the left.
But I think what it does do, I think all of this leads us back to one question, and one really important question is, how do we find a way to, I'm just going to say, live with social media without it destroying our democracy? We're not only talking about fringe parties, but how can we use social media? How can social media be part of our lives without it destroying our democracy? And so we asked Professor Maduro what he thought. What can we do?
We also need to work at the level of improving the quality of the editorial processes in social networks themselves. What does this mean? For example, accountability of algorithms. What exactly what determines the choices of information that algorithms make more easily accessible to us? To limit some of the risks with how algorithms are currently designed, because as I said, they have been designed to monetize information in light of the business model of social networks. They have not been designed as information editorial processes, when actually they do that. So we need to know those algorithms, to make them accountable, to scrutinize their criteria, to change their criteria. We might consider to impose rules requiring pluralism of algorithms, to allow people to choose different algorithms, for example.
I think what we found is that a mix of regulation and maybe algorithm transparency could go a long way to help us with the issues that we're having today.
I think we all have an idea of what to do, but the solution is still so far off. We'll keep on top of that for you. Thank you for listening this week.
And tune in 2 weeks. We will continue talking about fringe parties. In the meantime, you can find us on social media, because whatever we say about it, we're still there. We're still on Twitter. We're on Facebook and Instagram.
Exactly. And you can find us on our website, www.theinoculation.com, where you can find all of our past episodes and transcripts to all the episodes, and links to everything we discuss in the episodes.
Exactly. So bye for now.
Thank you. Bye for now.